Welcome to 10 Questions About Film, a podcast where I ask filmmaker friends 10 questions about their filmmaking process. In this episode, I talk to independent filmmaker Markou. Marcus successfully self-distributed his debut feature film, Papadopoulos and Sons, in 2013. The film went on to be bought by Netflix, ARTE, the BBC, and many worldwide territories. His short films, Two Strangers Who Meet 5 Times and Office Song, have played at many festivals around the world and earned him over 20 awards. With Two Strangers becoming a viral hit on YouTube and now has over 4.7 million views. In 2014, he was nominated by the London Critics Circle Awards for Breakthrough British Filmmaker. Marcus is also an accomplished playwright with Age, Sex, Location and Ordinary Dreams. Marcus continues to develop projects with his production company, Double M Films. His latest feature film, The Wife and Her Househusband, was released theatrically in 2023. The Guardian described the film as a worthwhile movie that genuinely gets under the skin of a long marriage. Besides being a working filmmaker, Marcus also speaks at various film industry events and film festivals, using his experiences to talk about how best to self-distribute. Okay, so Marcus, thank you for joining me on the show. It's a real privilege having you.
Thank you for inviting me, Craig.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're one of my inspirations, actually.
I bet you say that to everyone that comes on your brilliant podcast,
You're
Craig.
like my favourite. But, you know, the reality is the first time I met you, it was the Breakfast Club I think Chris Jones used to run.
Oh, yes. That was a quite infamous talk.
So you came on and you just gave this great talk, and it was really inspiring because you were just like, well, just go out there and do it.
I think the power of that talk was because I had not been able to secure any distribution for my debut feature, Papadopoulos and Sons.
Yeah.
And I'd gone out and self-distributed, and it had been a success. And I just told the story of the challenge. And I probably, in retrospect, was a bit too honest about how sales agents worked, how distribution worked. The business is always changing. But I think I was fundamentally too honest about how crooked the business was. When I look at it, it was very naive because I think I upset quite a few people, most of whom are not in the film business anymore, who have quite rightly been made redundant over the years. So and now maybe I don't regret.
Yeah, maybe you shone the light, right? So, I mean, it was the thing for me at that time. I was in a similar position, you know, because I'm originally from Cardiff and there wasn't a lot going on in Cardiff in the 80s. Now it's a hub, and now if I was there, it would be a different matter. You know, I left to try and pursue a career in film.
Yes.
And after doing film school, I kind of found myself in a position where the chip on my shoulder was probably bigger than the industry's resistance to me. And that got in the way for a long time. So it was talks like yours that actually made me reassess and actually sort of made me think, I need to be making more of an effort with the industry.
Interesting. I mean, I'm really obviously flattered that I've been an inspiration. But actually, the engagement with people like you, Craig, from those meetings and then the various relationships that were built upon were an inspiration to me as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so question number one, tell me about yourself. What's your background and what have you done?
Well, I came to filmmaking very late in life, and I loved films. I always got my information visually. I mean, I later discovered there were reasons for that, but I was one of those people that loved TV, and we were one of the first families in Birmingham in 1979 to get a video recorder, an old VHS Panasonic.
VHS, yeah.
And my mum was quite, again, she didn't read. She was just films and TV, films. And she was very film literate, my mum. She just loved movies. She would record all her favorite movies. So in 1979, aged 8, I was watching on repeat because there was no TV back then. Like kids' TV didn't start till later in the day, and at weekends it was a short window. Yeah. So I was watching films like Some Like It Hot, Good, Bad and the Ugly, What's Up, Doc. I love movies, but I never imagined I'd be a filmmaker. And in fact, I studied history and politics at university. I went into journalism. at the same time, I loved acting, but I never had the courage to go to drama school when I should have gone when I was like at university. So I went for something more traditional. And then I went to Lambda later on in life. So in my late 20s, I enrolled at Lambda on the postgraduate course, had the time of my life, got an agent, was about to become an actor. And then a family business took over my life, which involved my journalistic skills. So I helped launch that business, but I raised money for it. It was part of the dot-com boom. And it was going to be like a stepping stone, a short-term sort of thing before I went back into acting. But I never went back into acting. And in fact, I ended up working the business, and I still run that business today. I did a lot of improv theater, started writing, ended up writing plays, and was very happy writing plays. I had a play on at the Trafalgar Studios, play on at the Riverside Studios. And I was kind of doing something interesting with the plays, but absolutely getting destroyed by critics mostly, but attracting a TV film audience, which was quite interesting. The last play I did at the Trafalgar Studios was completely slated by critics. And I was so depressed. I remember before the run had even finished, I got on a plane, went to Cyprus, and my actor agent, who never got me any work as an actor, rang me and said, Charlie Brooker came to see your play and loved it and wants to meet you. And I was probably the one thing that stopped me from throwing myself into the Mediterranean. I was so depressed. I was like, oh my God, the critics hated it. But the one critic that hates everything liked it.
And what a guy to have, on your side, exactly.
And I ended up having a burger with Charlie Brooker and discussing it. I think he was a friend of one of the actors in it, who was James Lance. And I think the reason he came to that was because James Lance was in it, and James was brilliant in it. And what was interesting was that I was writing almost TV or film scripts for the stage.
Okay. Yeah. Got you.
And someone said, you should make films. And that at age 40, I went, how am I going to make films? I mean, that's crazy. I mean,
that is late to come to it, isn't it? It's crazy.
Well, I enjoy stories. I love films. Don't get me wrong. I'm very film literate. I'm passionate about movies, but my background is theatre. I see everything that I can see on the theatre. And I've written plays, and there's no way I can make a movie. And then I went to the Met Film School at 39. But even then, I was like, can I be a director, really? And I was thinking myself, producer, writer. Am I really a director? And the school said, look, Marcus, just direct the damn thing. You're really good.
Yeah.
Because you've been an actor, so you know how to talk to actors.
Well, that's something that's really key. And I'm finding across all the interviews I'm doing, all the directors I've talked to have all started out in acting.
Well, the greatest directors have been actors or have directed in the theatre. I mean, Sidney Lumet was a theatre director.
Yeah,
but, you know, Clint Eastwood, Robert Redford, who are the obvious actor-turned-directors. But acting is a fantastic way in to filmmaking, because actors have to embrace the whole storytelling experience.
Yeah.
And all filmmaking is a form of storytelling.
For me, I think the key point to it is, as a director, then you understand performance, and you understand the power of performance and how to convey that. And I think that's the key, isn't it? Is being able to put yourself in the shoes of an actor and go through their process of how to convey an emotion.
I think that's true. And I also think actors who become directors, I think their key advantage is they understand actors.
Yeah.
And therefore, actors are more relaxed. If you're directing, the most important thing is to get actors relaxed enough to give truthful, honest performances.
Well, performance is lifeblood of it all, isn't it, really? Without that, you've got nothing.
Yeah, and so when I was at Met Film School, they said, you should really direct this. And I had
Which film was that?
It was for film school. It was called The Last Temptation of Chris. The DOP on that, James Friend, who then ended up DOPing on Papadopoulos and Sons, who ended up was the DOP on All Quiet on the Western Front.
Amazing.
And was one of he's the youngest BAFTA winner, youngest Oscar winner, youngest member of the... And I learned so much working with James. I mean, it was brilliant working with him, because I understood how fluid filmmaking could be. So we were throwing away shot lists and throwing away floor plans. He very early on my first short film encouraged me to let the actors lead, and I was like, oh, this is brilliant. And it's only when you read interviews of more experienced directors that they say the same thing.
Yeah, let the actors in the space first.
Yeah. And having been to Lambda, trained as an actor, I had an agent, I was going for the odd job. I was bringing all those sorts of skills onto a film set. I felt very at home on a film set, even though I'd never been on a film set, because I'd spent ages in rehearsals, putting shows on, watching my own work on stage.
Did the business side, your business, were there skills in that area that you brought in
Oh,
that helped?
100%,
Certainly
because
producing wise, it
because
must have.
most directors, when they are artists who have basically lived a solitary life and have been maybe freelance, whether they've started off making pop videos and gone into filmmaking, or even if they've been actors, they're effectively freelance creatives hired. When
Yeah.
you're running your own business, you've effectively got to create systems, methods, culture. So I learned over the years to create a positive working culture, and it starts with the owner. And I was like, well, these are the sort of business cultures I want to create. So ones where everyone feels their voice is being heard,
Sure.
democratically empowered.
But that's essentially what the director's job is, isn't it, really? I mean, I see it very much as that you have to kind of bring out the best of people.
Of course.
And
But it was easy for me to do that because I'd done it for years with many situations. Like over many years, I've employed hundreds and hundreds of people in the company. Like, I've always found a way forward that's kind of grown up. And
yeah, there's no need to be a shouter. I've always found that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I've found on film sets, there is always conflict and there's always problems to sort out. But no problem is bigger than a mature, grown-up conversation.
Yeah, exactly. But also, if someone's not delivering on set, you have to find ways of dealing with that aren't just, I'm going to sack you or shout.
I mean, it does raise questions about the business, which is probably why I'm not business. I kind of sit outside of the normal business model because I'm pursuing very specific artistic goals, not commercial goals. I'm trying to tell stories that are important to me and hoping that those stories, because they're important to me, resonate with our audiences that might mean something to them too. That's my goal, because think about the culture of most film sets and even directors and writers it's everything's a stepping stone. Well, where are you going? It's a stepping stone to something bigger. And I was saying this to a DOP. He shot Two Strangers Who Meet 5 Times, which on YouTube is approaching 4 million
And that's
views.
crazy. Yeah, it's a good film.
And the comments I get every day, just people saying how fundamentally it's moved them. I've spent 5 years working out and still learning about what's working about a 12-minute short. And one of the insights I got was the very last part of that short. The actor originally in the screenplay had a line, and the actor on set went, I'm cutting the line out, I'm just going to give a look. It's the most powerful look, and it's not something that you could script.
No.
And I said to Chris, I still now think, like, how does that influence the next screenplay I'm writing, which is, how can I convey in a look without dialogue? And we concluded that sometimes you have to write the dialogue, get the actor to say it, but know in the back of your mind that if you leave enough space, you can cut the line and just be left with the look.
Yeah, that's every script of mine is like that. There's pages of dialogue and then it comes down to one look.
But if you can write the dialogue knowing that that's the creative process you're going to deliver, then it's like you're doing something really clever, which is like, I'm giving the actor the intention and helping him sculpt how he's going to deliver that line. But when I'm shooting it, in the back of my mind, I know I'm going to cut that line. So I can shoot it in a way to create enough space to get something really interesting. But I said to Chris, I can only get to that conclusion as an artist, as a creator, if I've got 5 years to think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next?
I mean, I think it's also about having the trust in the actor, in their interpretation, because I think a big part of it for me is I will write, I'll have a very clear thing in my head of what I want it to be, but then as soon as you give it to an actor, there's interpretation comes in. And interpretation is, I find it a beautiful process, because that's where it becomes something that you haven't thought of,
Of
and
course.
suddenly it becomes a really different thing that's much more powerful, because they'll just say, well, why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Internally
Yes.
they'll work out their process, and suddenly, like you said, they will give you that look that just says a million things.
I think you're right. I think a good actor, I think the great actors are able to mine the subconscious of the author.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a really brilliant collaborative process between a writer director and an actor. Not necessarily the same between a hired director and an actor, because that's then becomes a clash over interpretation.
Exactly. And a hired director, they've got X amount of shots they got to get done in a day. That's the harsh reality of the business. They've got to hit their target that day, because if they don't, they're behind schedule. I think a writer director who's more of an artist, or coming at it from more of an independent point of view, has the freedom, I think, to at least develop and run with ideas. Maybe not the budget, but with the tools that we have now that are cheap and easy to film. I mean, you can literally pick your phone out of your pocket and make a film if you want to, be on YouTube within a couple of weeks. So you have a freedom that you would never have had, like back in the old days when we were shooting on
That's
Super 8.
interesting. There's more writer directors in the space.
Yeah.
Interesting. I do think you're at an advantage with big name talent when you're the writer and the director, because you get a little bit of more grace, because the actors are looking at you as the author, and actors have a reverence for authors. I think also actors have an inbuilt dislike, and I don't even think it's conscious, of just directors that haven't written it. They're kind of like, hang on a minute, you're telling me how to understand the author. And that's when you get clashes on film sets. They're arguing over the author. But if you're a writer, director, very famous actors will give you respect, even if you're at the very beginning of your career, because you're doing something that a lot of actors dream of doing as well, which is to write. I've never met an actor that hasn't wanted to be a writer. And so you've got something over a very famous actor if you're a writer. And that is your key playing card. If you write something good enough, then an actor will be willing to jump out of the commercial madness that they're in and do it for very little, which is how I got Stephen Delane to do Papadopoulos and Sons for very little money. I mean, he won't mind me saying that publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Script is everything. At this level, if you don't have the toys to play with, then you better have the goods, which is the script. So, okay, brilliant. Question 2. What was the spark? When did you know that this was how you were going to spend the rest of your life? What was the moment where you just went, this is it. This is what I'm doing?
I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think this is the rest of my life.
Okay.
I really don't. Filmmaking for me is like I'm proud of my amateur status, right? I'm an independent, I'm a hobbyist.
Right.
And if I find the money and I find the alignment of the stars, I'll go and make a film, whether it's a short film or a feature film. My last feature film, I completely wrote around a pot of money. And I was like, I had other ideas. I've got other scripts. I've always got a script going, always got a story going. And I thought, well, I don't have any screenplay ideas or any screenplays that I can finance with this small pot of money. So I'm going to have to write a new script. So I don't think of myself in those terms of being a filmmaker. I get the opportunity to make films as and when that
I see
arises.
the distinction. I find that quite surprising that you don't consider yourself a filmmaker, because I would say that you have achieved a lot more than, I mean, I know jobbing directors who, quote unquote, I'm a film director, who work maybe once every 6-7 years, because that's the nature of the industry, and they're not, maybe their last film wasn't a big hit or whatever, or didn't make enough money to pay back their financiers. But I would say that you've consistently made films that have done well and achieved a certain level of success. So
I don't think I have.
it's funny how we perceive our own careers, right?
I see myself as a fringe artist in a very big billions of dollars industry. So think of it as a harbor with all these giant ships and tankers, and big filmmakers are giant ships. And I see myself as I mean, maybe it started off as a canoe, but I kind of see myself maybe as a small little speedboat.
You're kind of, yeah, Jack Sparrow at the beginning of the first Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm not on the treadmill that says I need to be making a bigger film with a bigger budget and more bigger stars, and I don't.
Yeah,
see
that's bullshit. We all know that's bullshit,
but
right?
that's
just money.
90% of people.
It is, but what you're doing is you're making projects, I would suggest, like myself, where you kind of, these are projects you're passionate about and projects that have heart and projects that you believe in. I look back at my career and it's been hit and miss for the most part, and I've had moments where I could have had the commercial career and it didn't work for one reason or another. Part of that was me making a decision not to go that route because, there was a point in my 30s where I had an agent. I was signed to London Management in Soho and I was getting projects prepped and ready to go. And we had Lionsgate interested in one of them and it was all kind of ready to go. And then it all kind of fell apart because we had our lead actress died. And it killed the project because the project
God, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, no, but this, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's just a film. Whereas this poor woman lost her life, right? So, I walked away from that and just went, well, actually, I've spent 5 years trying to get this project together. We got very close, but it all fell apart at the last minute. In that 5 years, I could have gone and shot a load of other films that I was more passionate about, that were more me. And so I basically bought an old MG midget and did a bit of crowdfunding and went on the road with an actor and shot my road movie as a result of doing, that 5-year block. And in a way, I kind of wish I'd just done that in the first place instead of going a more traditional route and fighting the whole system of trying to break into Hollywood, because that was, and I've had a couple of friends who've broken into Hollywood and actually in the end, it didn't really serve them very well. And they ended up being, their careers didn't last very long.
I think this is that idea of breaking into Hollywood, it's sort of part of our conditioning that you're not meant to feel successful until you've and yet I know the same people who have had, in inverted commas, very successful Hollywood careers who feel failures.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
even within that system, you're made to feel like less than. Why are so many successful Hollywood players in rehab or have endless addictions? How has that served them? Because they've bought into this idea. And it's the same you see in all forms of entertainment. You see it in football, you see it in corporate world. It's like, well, if I achieve X and Y, this is what your mind tells you, then I will be a success. And therefore I will have value and I'll have a sense of self-worth. And it's a zero-sum game because the goalposts keep moving. And oh my God, you're up for an Oscar. Oh, you didn't win it. Oh God, you're up for an Oscar and you won it. Congratulations, you're now a success. But you haven't won the second one, or you haven't won the third.
You have to do more. Yeah.
It's just nonsense. The reason I'm sane and able is because I do treat myself outside of that industry, and I don't see myself as a filmmaker primarily, but I do see it as a passion that I enjoy and love. But I also say it's a privilege if I get to do it at any point in the future. And that's it. That's my whole philosophy.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I came to that decision, as I said, in my 30s, partly because of the back end of being with an agent in London that was a big agency at the time. And then 9/11 happened and my agent decided she didn't want to be an agent anymore. And I suddenly found myself, as a few of her clients did, without an agent and out in the wilderness. So it was a question of, well, am I going to try and spend all my time trying to get another agent and crack into the industry? Or am I just going to go and make a film, which is what I did. I gathered together, about £15,000 of private equity, got a free location and 15, 16 people. And we went and shot for 45 days in a big old spooky mansion down in Dorset, made a horror film. Off the back end of that, it sort of taught me that I didn't need to break into the industry. I was already in it. But the other thing was I used to do a lot of extra work as well. And I worked on a lot of big Hollywood films as an extra. And you'd just be on set all the time and you'd see all the nonsense that went on in terms of the committee meetings that went on to get a shot in the can. And you kind of go, well, actually, that's not what I want to sign up to as a director. I don't want to have to be in a committee to agree on whether a character would drink a beer off a table this way or that way. And that's literally, I saw that. I saw half a day wasted where producers and a director were arguing with the lead actor over how he drank a beer off a table. And this was a big Hollywood film that made, a bundle of money and won Oscars. And you kind of go, well, actually, that's not really filmmaking. That's business. And I get it.
It is business. And this is why I'm not exciting as a filmmaker. I accept that because I'm not in that world. What I am potentially is the information and knowledge. If you want to go into that world, let's say, and you want to make your first independent feature film and you want to get it distributed and you want to have a shot at earning a living in the business, I am a really good stepping stone for how you can do it. Like get something off the ground, get something made, get something seen, create a bit of a noise. And I think that's why I do these podcasts, or why there's sometimes some interest in me, and why I go to a lot of film schools. And it's because, oh, well, that's a good way in. And if you look at the careers of a lot of very successful, like inverted commas, successful, highly paid filmmakers like Chris Nolan, they all start doing small indie films that they often have to self-distribute. Everyone starts in this space. And I think the way I kind of do it is of interest to those people that want to get in and have a career.
Yeah.
But I'm not the person that you come to when you're like, when you like want inspiration for your fourth Hollywood movie.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, I've got this big action sequence, right? I've got all these guys over here and I got a big explosion. What do I do? Okay, with that in mind, let's move on to question 3. Because who is your biggest hero or influence?
I do like philosophers. I like people who dedicate their life to how one should live. I like Eckhart Tolle, for example, who wrote The Power of Now. I like Michael Singer as an author. And these are the people currently in my sphere that I'm kind of reading and reflecting and thinking. There's a guy called Gabor Mate, who is really wonderful author. He's an old man now, but he was like a doctor who was treating people with addiction. And then he started to make the link between addiction and trauma and childhood trauma. And then his whole body of work is about all children suffer trauma. And the adult is really the adult that you create. And it's really important for writers, by the way, and artists, because a lot of my work as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, touches on all of these things anyway.
But this is why I asked that question, because it's not necessarily who your filmmaking heroes are. The writer you were just talking about, looking into childhood trauma. Yes. I mean, given the state of the world at the moment, and I don't want to veer too much into real world politics or anything like that, but we can see the effects of childhood trauma playing out writ large at the moment, because we have people running the world who are clearly traumatized by childhood trauma and the parental relationships. And it's interesting because I have a TV series that I've been developing, which deals exactly with that, about how that, that need to prove your worth constantly to a parent who, in some cases, I think parents don't necessarily know that they've done this. It's not that they're bad parents even, because there are so many triggers along the way. I've done a lot of research into this, and I do find it staggering, that people get triggered by the slightest thing, it might be a really loving, caring parent. It's, not in all cases, obviously, but in some cases where the child has been triggered at a very young age and completely unaware, but it's completely affected their relationship and their self-worth.
And Gabor Mate talks about he was a Czech Jewish boy and was witness to the Holocaust, like had to be hidden as a child and then had to go stay with people that were friends of the family. And he says his own childhood traumas, he was 4 at the age, doesn't remember it necessarily, but created enough emotional trauma at that age to then reverberate later on in his life. And that's kind of what you're saying, which is it doesn't take much to create that emotional disturbance. But I mean, to go back to your question on heroes, I guess my heroes are, they're not even well-known people. Sometimes they're just people who I've had this conversation with, and I've really learned a lot about life and living. And so I think all my heroes are often sort of either philosophers, investigators in how one lives one's life. And that can come in the form of a book or a YouTube video or a conversation with someone in a shop, for example. But, you know, if you ask me who my heroes were 20 years ago, I'd say, you know, David Bowie and Marlon Brando, Francis Ford Coppola. And I'd say, these are my heroes. But I think as you get older and the clock of mortality ticks away, you start going, well, they are. I love these people. I love Bob Dylan. I love Iggy Pop and Lou Reed. And, you know, I still have passion for music. And I love a certain kind of authors as well. But are they heroes? You know, as you get older, you start thinking, well, what is a hero? You know? Obviously, they're people that gave you nurture and a steer in life who are no longer with us. It could be a grandparent or it could be a teacher. As you get older, you look back and reflect, oh, these are the people that really helped me shape how I could live in this world. And they become your heroes.
So with all that in mind, how do you think that affects your filmmaking?
I think it completely affects everything I've ever tried to make in the world, as a film, as a writer, as an author, as whether I'm writing plays or whether I'm writing a short film or a feature film, or whether I'm going to write a book. My focus is on transformation. How do we as human beings transform to the higher version of ourselves and to make sense of the world? So I think those people that are heroes to me were fundamentally helping me make sense of the world, whether they were a relative, a friend, or David Bowie.
Okay, I want to move on to number 4. Tell me all about your first film and what it was.
Well, the first short I did, which was at film school, was Last Temptation of Chris. And we had to make a short, and I didn't know what I was going to tell. So I looked at the story structure of Casablanca. I went, oh, I'll just take the Casablanca story. So the story was, this guy's a therapist. He's helping people move on in life. And one day, his ex-girlfriend walks in with her husband, and it was an unfinished love affair. And instead of this therapist saying, oh, conflict of interest here, I know her, he carries on seeing them for therapy and then starts to have an affair with her behind the back of the guy that he's also in therapy with. But then he comes to his own conclusion that this is immoral. But she madly still in love with him because they had this original thing and it was an unfinished love affair. And he kind of fixes their relationship and sacrifices himself. Wow, everyone goes, that's a great story, Marcus. Therapist, people coming. But it's really, I just looked at Casablanca and went, how can I tell this in a modern setting and do it in a short story? I
did the same with, funny enough, with my road movie that I was talking about earlier on. I mean, it's basically Christmas Carol, but it's on a road trip where there's a guy who's dying and he meets people along the way who teach him lessons so he can confront his dad at the end and put things right. But, you know, I didn't subconsciously do it in the same way that you're talking about. I mean, I literally kind of watched it after the first cut and just went, oh my God, it's literally Christmas Carol.
No, I was conscious. I was like deliberately like, oh God, I need to tell a short story. What's the greatest film ever made or the one that I love the most? Casablanca.
Yeah, of course.
How could I do that? And I was just found ways of just retelling that as a short. But I didn't know anything about festivals. I didn't know how to put into festivals. I didn't know didn't even screen it for the casting. I didn't know anything about any of that. I was like, what do I do now? I've just made this short film. So
I was the same. I was at film school. I made a short film about a guy who turns blue and I didn't know anything, you know, and I thought I did because I was a bit older than everyone else. I thought I knew it all. And so I started sending it out, you know, to festivals and luckily it got picked up. because it was a funny little quirky film about a guy turns blue. But it's funny how people read something completely different. They see it as racism, they see it as political, they see it as all these things, and you just kind of go, yeah, that's what I intended. Let them have it, because people will always read more into your films, I think, than you necessarily put in.
I think that happens a lot. Yeah.
Okay, question number 5. What is the worst filmmaking experience, and how has that defined you as a filmmaker?
Oh, interesting. My worst filmmaking experience. I don't have any bad, actually, where I'm filmmaking bad experience, because even the bad things were opportunities to something more interesting.
Yeah, a chance.
But I think the most distasteful part of filmmaking is, I think, dealing with agents. Actually, there's a lot of great agents in theatrical agents, well, good, solid people that are decent. The problem is a lot of the business will just see talent as a commodity that needs to be milked. I mean, to go back to your question, the worst experience is dealing with people whose only goal is to make money. And it's very short term. There are a lot of good people in the business, but the problem is, if it's all about money, and for a lot of the UK talent agencies, it's not always just about money. Traditionally, they understood that the client needed a broader range of work. Yes, they could do Hollywood movies, but they should be doing theatre, and they should be doing independent film, because that's what's going to create longevity in the actor's career. That's what's going to sustain the actor over a longer period of time, and in the end, bring the agency more money. You just see the short-term revenue gain for the hottest actor in that moment, and they're not thinking of a career that's going to span 60 years. So I feel justified in having this argument, because if I sat down with some of the talent agencies at the big corporates, I'd say, you're doing your own profit line a disservice, because you're not nurturing the talent for over a lifetime. You're just seeing the talent of what they can do for your agency right now, and then you're dumping them.
Conversely then, what's your best filmmaking experience, and how has that helped you as a filmmaker?
It's always on the set when action is called. And even if things don't go right, even if there's a technical problem, or even if the performance isn't happening or whatever, it's still an amazing experience. Like, there's some bit of magic going on there when so many parts of the machinery, all the planning, costume, hair, makeup, lighting, camera department, sound recordists, the location, the set design, so many people's hours of energy and commitment have come to this point when action is called and there's that moment of silence and the focus is on the actor saying those lines. And it feels quite magical. It feels like a moment. And obviously, when everything comes together and the story is being told and we're all telling the same story at this time, and then cut is called, and you get an energetic rush from all these different people, which is we've done it. It
works.
It's worked. And the actor feels good about themselves. Everyone feels good about themselves. That is an amazing moment. When you think of the journey of a film, the script is written, pre-production, finance, locations, and then you're into production and you're shooting. And then afterwards, all the post-production, distribution, marketing. The moment I've just described in detail is a tiny, 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 tiny part of the process. And when you think that how much of that filming actually makes it into a final edit is even tinier. So you're talking about a tiny, tiny slice of that entire process, which is the magical bit of it. It's beautiful. And I do always feel that time doesn't exist in that moment. 8 hours could feel like 30 minutes. Like, where does the day go? And you just lose track of space and time. So for me, the most beautiful part of that process is then, because you're outside of time and everyone's engaged. Everyone has got to that moment of reverence when the drama is being played out. So yeah, that's magical.
And then you shout cut, and then someone says boom in shot. And then
And it doesn't matter because
no, it doesn't.
because I don't care about that because there's a reason for it. And then you might find that when you've gone again because of the boom shot, often you've got a better.
Yeah, because people are focused. That moment of communication between you and an actor where you both get it. This is exactly the right spot for us to be in. That for me is the moment. And then if you can capture that perfectly on film or video or digital, whatever format you're on.
Well, there is something very special about that because also, having worked in theatre, when I say worked, having put on plays,
lounged around like a,
But there was something beautiful, but also frustrating about a moment that can never be recreated. And that's the magic of theatre, that it exists once in this moment and then it's forgotten forever. And it's just a distant memory in some people's heads. There is something quite rewarding about capturing something that can be held for many, many years. And that's in itself quite a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, a sense of achievement and a sense of a job well done, I suppose. And also, that it's going to sound pretentious, but the feeling that you've captured some truth of the moment, that for me is the magic of it. And whether that's big emotional moment or whether it's just a spaceship flying through space, doesn't matter. If you feel like you've captured a sense of the truth of the story, then that's when it works for me. It's the cave people sitting around a fire sharing those stories and sharing that information and passing on knowledge and ideas and feelings and emotions. For me, it's all encapsulated in that. So, number 7, how did you get your first film sold or distributed? Now, I know this story, obviously, but for the benefit of people listening, was it through a company or did you self-distribute?
I mean, I self-distributed, and I could probably do a 2-hour talk on it, and I'm not going to.
Let's keep it brief.
There's so much information about how I did it, but to cut a long story short, I just self-distributed, and I did it using a theatrical release, and it's the advice I still give to people now.
You four-walled, didn't you?
Pardon?
You four-walled?
No, it wasn't four-walling, actually. I actually got a deal with Cineworld, exclusively with Cineworld, and they gave me quite a good cut. It was 35% of the box office, and I was told that Bond movies only get 40, right? Wow. So I was one tier down from a Bond movie on the basis that I was exclusive with Cineworld. But to get the Cineworld box office split, I had to work really hard in the run-up to it and make a case to Cineworld. And I said, look, I can fill cinemas with Greeks, and they weren't sure about it. And it took me a good year or so doing film festivals. I won the Audience Award at Thessalonica Film Festival. It went to Palm Springs, and it was a favorite at Palm Springs. And we got really good reviews. And then on the back of that, it went to Seattle Film Festival. I was doing this kind of really cool festival run. And I worked with Martin Myers and Maura Ford, who was a kind of producer service agency, rather than we'll take your film, flog it. They were working for me as a producer. So it was almost like having your own agent working for you. So that's how I did it. I built up a case and went to Cineworld and said, I can do a theatrical release. And like, we're not sure. And Martin Myers was like saying, you can four-wall it another chain of cinemas or a small. And I went, no, I want Cineworld. I want a proper release. So I said, well, to do that, you're going to have to build a case. And I built a case and I built my business plan. And then it went to like weird places like the European Union. It got screening in the EU, actually in their room.
In the Parliament.
In the Parliament. And then they never had that before. And everyone was listening to it on those headphones. And
that must have been a surreal moment.
Yeah, and it was surreal. And so all this stuff was kind of happening. And the BBC were interested. They were like, after Palm Springs, because it got a really good write-up in Hollywood Reporter and said Stephen Delane's best ever showcase. And BBC loved Stephen Delane. And they said, oh, if this does a theatrical release, we will buy it. And I was like, oh, things are lining up. And in the end, Cineworld went, we will give you a theatrical release. We'll give you like 12 cinemas. And everything's about the second week. All your costs is in the first week. The cost is what? It's print and advertising. So what is that? Posters. It's the DCP. And
I remember those days.
Yeah, exactly. So, but which was still an improvement on giving them a 35mm reel. So all of the money goes into that and marketing. But in your second week, you're not spending those costs. So you're kind of reaping the benefits without the cost. So obviously, the longer a film plays in a cinema, the more money it's going to make. Because all your cost is front loaded into that first week. And I said to Martin, what do I need for a second week? I remember this clearly. And he said, you need to do 500. And I went, okay. And I assumed he meant 500 per cinema. No, 500 people.
Oh, people per cinema, right.
Per cinema. He meant 500 pounds.
Yes.
So I went away and built a plan to get 500 people into every cinema in its opening week. And so I was like a maniac. So a misunderstanding is what set me off on successful distribution. The misunderstanding was if you said 500 quid, I was like, I can get 500 quid. I just do a plan to get 500 quid. That's what, like 50 people a cinema or whatever. But I was doing 500 people a cinema and I did like crazy stuff. I mean, I did everything. I built this credible self-distribution plan that involved going to local communities, flyering, getting Greek Orthodox priests to mention the film in their Sunday services before the opening weekend. The message went out. Everyone in the Greek community knew this. I did community screenings of the making of Papadopoulos and Sons. Mm-hmm. The Hellenic Centre in London, at the Greek Community Centre in Birmingham. Hundreds of people turned up to that. And I gave them flyers. I said, you are the mavens and the connectors that go out and get other people to come. So in the end, we did the second highest screen average of any film in its opening weekend, only beaten by Tom Cruise's Oblivion.
That's amazing.
So Martin Myers was like ringing me manically on the Monday going,
give me more films.
God, we need more. Cineworld keeps saying, where do you want to go next?
That's amazing.
So we
went. I mean, obviously, all that hard work worked for one, but also the key point there was a USP, which is there is a Greek film about the Greek community in London. Yeah, so you had something to sell it on.
But I knew it had breakout ability because my audiences at Palm Springs and Seattle were all Americans.
Yeah, yeah,
and they weren't Greeks, and they loved the film. This is the point with distribution: find your niche in. If you've got breakout ability, which Papadopoulos and Sons did have, because even though it was about Greeks, it could have been about anyone. It was a universal story of riches to rags. And everyone said, oh, this is a well-worn story. But there aren't actually that many stories out there that are like that. It's just we know that story from real life. Pick up a newspaper any day or go to online and you'll see a story of riches to rags. And so when we ended up with this great screen average, and I put it in, like, it ended up being in 20, 30 odd cinemas, but I didn't have the plan for week 2 or week 3 or week 4. Right. And that's when I reached out to distributors and went, look, what do I do now? And they're like, it's too late. You're up and away. I didn't plan for that kind of success. I just didn't. I was absolutely stunned when we got those numbers. And then it did enough to get written about and noticed. And then that's BBC would take it. Netflix took it first before BBC. A German distributor took it. A Greek distributor took it. The German distributor did a 100-screen release in German, dubbed into German. But he had a deal with ARTE, French broadcaster. And so it went onto French TV and German TV. And then it got sold to the Middle East. And it did those things. It did airlines. It was really great, like in Far East airlines, like Malaysia Air and places like that. It did all these different, really brilliant things. And each time it's a bit of money.
How quickly did it recoup?
In that first year, it did about half of what it cost. But I didn't do EIS. I mean, if you then add the tax credit, it was kind of starting to wash its face. But it didn't do massive, and it didn't do any American deals where a lot of the money is going to be, right? But it did enough, and it got me up and away, and it got the film. My ultimate goal was to get it known and seen, and that's what happened. And, you know, Netflix paid nothing for it. Nothing.
No, I've had a few things on Netflix, and they don't.
But it was a really popular film. This was at a time when Netflix were, this was 2012, 2013. I think they'd only just started their first.
Doing their originals, yeah.
But they didn't pay much at all. I knew it was very popular because back then, in the early days, they had their star rating. You could rate, and they took away their star rating because I think that was letting filmmakers know how popular their film was. And it had thousands of thousands of thousands.
Yeah, as a negotiating tool for the next deal, I suppose the star rating thing was a bit of a...
So they whipped that off, but it was like it had something crazy, like 30,000 reviews, and it was averaging 3.7 stars out of 5, and it was like very highly viewed on Netflix. Because I know this because I was getting random emails from people all over the world going, "I just saw your film on Netflix. I had to reach out and write to you."
That's what I mean about you being successful, is in the sense that, you do make films that do find an audience. And surely that's key as a filmmaker, is to be able to find your audience. And you do seem to do that.
I do. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I think but it takes time sometimes to find an audience. And I think I don't make fashionable movies. That's why I'm not exciting.
Yeah.
But I do find an audience because I think I make films with heart.
Surely that's what we need in this industry, right?
And that's what connects to audiences over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be that filmmaker.
Question number 8. What does it mean to be a filmmaker to you? How would you describe what you do?
It's storytelling. It's a vehicle to tell your story and a vehicle to tell a story that I care about. That doesn't preclude me telling stories in other ways, whether they're short stories, books, plays, YouTube videos, podcasts. For me, filmmaking is a vehicle by which I can tell a story that means something to me.
I think we now live in a world where you can do that. The technology allows us to just go and do stuff in a way that we could never have done even 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, maybe filmmaking in the old traditional sense isn't, I don't know, maybe it's changing, maybe it's morphing into something new.
What's changed is our consumption of entertainment, and going to the cinema has stopped. Cinema is not a mass medium that it once was.
No.
Painful as it is to say, it just isn't. My wife is a teacher, and what she picked out was they don't go to the cinema like our kids used to go to, and our kids are only 20 and 16. But we would go to every Pixar, every Toy Story. My eldest got into Star Wars, the Star Wars movies, etc. And they are cinema literate, my kids. So they will watch movies. But it's interesting that my wife says that these kids don't do that at the weekends. They don't go to the cinema in the numbers. It's not part, and they don't even watch TV.
It's not their culture.
So not even watching TV. So everything is streamed on smartphones.
Yeah, same with my kids, yeah.
And iPads, right? And tablets. Like that's how they're consuming entertainment, cut short form, and like you can't even plonk them in front of a Peppa Pig DVD like you once did. So I think that because our viewing habits, our culture is changing, this had a huge impact on cinema, for example. And I think cinema is going to become like opera.
Yeah, I agree.
It's going to be a middle-class, heightened art experience.
Well, it's already going that way. You look at IMAX, and that's becoming an event and priced accordingly. So it ends up being.
There's still going to be the big movies that we're all going to turn out to.
Yeah.
That's why the Chris Nolans of this world are worth every penny, because Chris Nolan is basically flying the flag for cinema right now. You can take a subject like Oppenheimer, which is practically very dull. It's just physicists trying to work out equation problems, and somehow he managed to turn that into a blockbuster movie.
It's crazy.
And I tip my hat off to anyone who can do that. And I'm a big fan of his. I love his movies, and I love how he can take big concepts and create them into something entertaining for the masses. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, Interstellar.
But Interstellar's a great film. But the days of us going to the cinema to see a drama comedy, which is I loved, are over, or a rom-com.
Yeah.
Maybe those days are over. And I think that, so our viewing habits have changed. That's reflected in what's happening at the cinema. I was on the fringes and niche before. Now I'm right on the fringes and niche, because cinema as an art form is marginalized now, I think.
I like to think of it more as you're on the cutting edge, really, because, Hollywood isn't doing what we are doing.
Oh, that's interesting. And so I do have 4 million, nearly approaching 4 million views for Two Strangers.
Exactly. And also, we do, this interactive film I'm directing at the moment, it's batshit crazy. And it's definitely not something that Hollywood would ever touch.
Oh, interesting. I never thought of it like that.
If it works, it would be something I'd be very proud of. And it will work because we'll make it work. But
Well, I want it to work because no,
thanks.
you're right, and I think maybe what I did with that short film was an eye opener because it has more views than some of my favorite pop songs.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like I go to some of my favorite pop songs. I think, hang on a minute, I've got more views on a 12-minute short film that's a drama. Yes, interesting.
I don't think you should underestimate the achievement of it. To get 4 million on a 12-minute drama,
yeah,
it's pretty impressive, right? So
yeah, and actually, I go back to Papadopoulos on Netflix. I calculated it done something like 5 or 6 million views. I kind of worked out with the ratio. I'd done all the maths, and with the ratio between likes and ratings, and even if it was like, shit, if only 1 out of 50 people rate it, what does that mean in terms of overall views? Is it 1 in 100? What does that mean for overall views? And I was trying to work out what is the ratio between the number of people that watch it and those that then on and go and rate it. And it might have even been 1 to 500. Do you know what I mean? And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, tens of millions of people have seen Papadopoulos on Netflix.
This is the thing. I genuinely think that us independents are at the cutting edge because we can adapt quickly. It's funny. There's an old producer friend of mine called Kevin Moss, and we used to do interactive material about 10, 15 years ago. And one of the things he said to me, we went to this big gaming stroke interactive media conference up in London, and all the big guys there, Netflix were there, Paramount and Sony and everyone. And one of the things he said to me, which made absolute sense, is like they're basically one of those massive ocean, bringing the boats in again, one of those massive ocean liners that takes forever to turn around to miss the iceberg. But we're in a little dinghy rowing along, but we can turn at a minute's notice. And being an independent these days, you can change and adapt in a much easier and quicker way.
Interestingly, I feel more heartened by this conversation because I've been thinking about this the last week. And coincidentally, actually, like what does it mean to be a filmmaker now? And I'm thinking, oh God, am I just basically making opera for the middle classes? Like, is that what I'm going to end up doing?
Well, we might be.
Only time will tell. Is that what I really want to do? Because I'm trying to get a feature film off the ground, which is about Syrian refugee, set in 2016 up north, and I nearly very got close to making it. And
this is Ali's English, is it?
Yeah, and it's now called Two Kids.
Okay.
And I got really close to getting something going. And at the last minute, one of the actors that was attached couldn't do it. Other job came in. That's fine. It's the nature of the business. But the whole thing collapsed like an elegant souffle. And I was a little bit upset for about 24 hours to 48 hours. And then I was like, oh, well, actually, maybe I'm dodging a bullet here. Who knows what's around the corner? But I had a bit more interest in it again recently. And there's a producer who's doggedly determined to get it made. And I think, I don't know, I think maybe that's beyond opera, the concept, because it's a really potentially divisive story.
Right.
Because it's set in 2016. It's refugees, which is a returning topic. But it's like Two Strangers. It's very human. It's very sympathetic to the humanity of both sides of the story.
Which is the conversation we should be having instead of the mainstream conversation that we're having about refugees.
Yeah, but I'm quite philosophical about it, Craig. If it's meant to be, it will be, and the right people will come to it. Okay, the first 48 hours when it collapsed, I was in a mess.
Yeah.
But once I got myself together, I was like, I'm not willing to give my energy or any night, and I say this to every filmmaker or artist, don't lose any sleep over anything.
No.
It's not worth it.
You can't. Pick yourself up, dust yourself down and move on to the next one.
Well, if it's meant to be, the stars will align for you. And if it's not meant to be, maybe you're dodging a bullet. Because I hear people that were so desperate to get something made, they forced it, and then it was a disaster.
Right, moving on. Question number 9. Tell me about the best gadget or tool that helps you as a filmmaker.
The best gadget? Probably the smartphone, actually, because when you're scouting locations, you're taking photos, but you can also film as well. And actually, when you're walking around with a DOP, it's very easy now to get people to stand in, and you can weirdly, with just the smartphone recording,
Animatics, basically.
you can start filming what you probably, and then you go home and you press play on what you recorded that day, and it looks pretty good on the smartphone. And when I wasn't sure sometimes of how something would work, I get my kids and my wife to stand in. And so when I'm trying to communicate an idea to the DOP or the editor even, like even before we've gone into production, a couple of times I've said to the editor, this is how the opening's going to work.
Yeah.
Or for example, even with actors, like people say, like I made a film called The Wife and Her Househusband, which you saw.
I did.
And they were going, how on earth are you going to do, how are you going to do the texting on the phone? There's so much text. And I was really thinking about this. I was like, I don't want to put text on a screen because there's so much. So I'll just do it as voice in the head. So literally, I got my kids, one kid in one bedroom, another kid in the kitchen, to be pretending to be texting. And then I recorded their voiceover and I cut a short little 2-minute exchange. And I sent that to the actors. This is how we're going to do it. So I would say the smartphone is easily the best device because you're just taking photos, shooting, you're visualizing in a way, you're storyboarding.
Yeah, it's completely like you're pre-shooting.
Yeah.
You could pre-shoot your whole film that way. And, funny enough, I've started doing the same sort of thing as well. So it's a brilliant way. I'd agree. I recently bought an Osmo Pocket 3 camera, which is a tiny little 4K camera, but on a gimbal. So it's handheld and it's tiny little thing. It's about the size of an iPhone. But you can do the same sort of thing and I just carry it around with me everywhere. But actually, it's really good for getting stock footage as well. If I see something I think that's a great image, I can just grab it. And because it's 4K, you can manipulate it enough to sort of fit it in enough. I think you can get away with it, especially as an independent. You've got no choice because you don't have money always for a second unit or something like that.
I filmed one of the rehearsals for Wife and Her Househusband and I was DOPing because I shot handheld and I was literally finding these incredible, and I showed them to Chris. I went, and he was like, brilliant. That gives me a model of what we can be doing. So you're right. You're testing your shots before you have to shoot them.
It's the old thing that Ben Burtt used to do on the Star Wars films. In his downtime, he would, Lucas would give him a video camera, old VHS camera back in the day, and they'd go out and they would, literally they used the Star Wars figures and they would film them to get their shots, using the toys.
Yeah, so that's amazing.
I think having the ability to do that is amazing, to convey an idea so simply and so easily. Yeah, that's a good choice. I like that. Yeah, it's good. Right, well, we're at the end. So we've got one more question. So question 10, finally, what is the one thing you'd wish someone had told you when you first started out?
I wish I'd started earlier. I can't believe I waited till I was 40. But then there's probably no other way. That question invites some kind of regret. And the only regret I have is I wish I'd just, like when I was at university, I launched a magazine and I wish I'd just made a bloody film.
That experience, though, must feed into
of course it does.
What you do now, because the confidence that it would have given you, the understanding of business, all of those things add into.
I know, but I think of I just think of where I could have been now if I got. But then you're right. I'm kind of accidental in most of my life.
Well, would you have made the films you've made if you'd started earlier?
No, I'd probably be an absolute monster, wouldn't I?
Driving around LA in your big convertible. As most of us would be, given that opportunity.
I wouldn't be reading Gabor Mate and meditating on childhood trauma. I'd be firing people on set. Yeah, and I'd be a monster. My ego would have taken over and destroyed me. So I was protected long enough. It's like to become a filmmaker when you're old and mature, and you'll make a different kind of movie, and you'll have a more balanced life.
Maybe you wouldn't have had 4 million views of one of your films.
No, I know I would have probably been a monster and addicted to something.
Yeah.
But no, I'm trying to think of your question again. Like, what advice do I wish I'd been given I think the advice is just have very little expectation
Yeah.
of anything. And I think that's the advice for all life, isn't it? It's
Expect
like,
nothing and gain everything.
just lower your expectations.
Yeah.
And actually, that doesn't mean you're not going to make a great film or a
No,
good
not at
film. We all sort of equate success to a certain thing, and actually success can come in other ways. But, you know, we didn't know that then.
I think for me, the one thing I wish someone had told me was that the gatekeepers that I perceived with that little chip on my shoulder from, you know, being this Super 8 filmmaker from Cardiff with a chip on his shoulder, I wish I'd not listened to that voice saying, there's not a place for you in this industry. Because I think some of my battles have been longer than they needed to have been because of it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think if I had just kind of blindly gone into it rather than having a perceived, again, expectations of what I was battling.
The point here is, who are you giving your power to? Unfortunately, if you're giving your power, that's your focus, your energy, your attention, your sense of value is based on how someone else values you. That's power, right? When we say, what does it mean to give your power away? What it means to give your power away is to say that what someone thinks of me is more important than what I think of myself.
I think that's exactly right.
Right. That is power. That's what it means to give your power away. Now, when you put that in context of the film industry, you are now giving your power away to toxic people who are manipulative and only geared towards their own self-interest. So hang on a minute. You're an artist and you've given your power to this person. You're saying that what this toxic person thinks of me is more valuable than what I think of myself. That's a really low starting point.
But it's incredible how many people go along with that, right?
Everyone does it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone does it.
Yeah. The silly part of all that is when I was 10 or 11, I used to make Super 8 films. I'd get a little cartridge, 4-minute reel, send it away via the chemist. It'd take a couple of weeks, it'd come back, and I had a projector, and I used to project these films in my bedroom on a sheet. And I would get my friends in these films, and I would do little flyers and I'd take them into school and I would get my friends to come and watch these films that we'd made, charge them like 10p a go. And, you know, at the end of the week, I'd end up with quite a bit of money in my pocket. I was literally whoring out my own bedroom as a cinema, but it worked. And somewhere along the line, I'd forgot that I could do that. As you get older and, you know, society starts to mold you a little bit, you forget.
Because you're valuing the gatekeeper and you're valuing the industry, and that's fine, right? But you need to value yourself. Like, you need to give the power to yourself. The moment you allow someone else to value what you're worth, it's very dangerous.
Yes. Which is why having an agent that didn't really work out for me was the best thing that probably happened to me ever, really, in terms of filmmaking, because there was a moment where I walked away from that going, but I don't need an agent. I don't need their say-so to go and make a film. And I bought a Canon XL1 and went out and started making a film. And that film is still now available on Amazon. And, you know, people watch it and I make 0.111, percent of whatever. Certainly will never retire on it, but it's out there. And, so I think that's the most valuable thing you can learn, is that you can just go and do it.
But also, Craig, I would also add, right, and this is for all the filmmakers and artists listening to this, is your sense of self-worth and value is not even in the films that you make, actually, right? It's actually in you as a human being and how you operate in the world, and how that's the only thing that, at the end of the day, look, like, this is why when you say, I don't really think of myself as a filmmaker. Primarily, my goal in this life is to be the best version of myself that I can be as a human being. If I get the opportunity to make a film, that's a bonus. And I think the danger with a lot of artists is that their sense of self-worth will always be somehow bound up in the films that they make, or the books that they write, or for an actor, the performances that they give. And it's a zero-sum game. You're never going to win at that game, ever. I think what all artists need to do is get that first bit right. Like, what does it mean to be a good, functioning human being in this world?
Decent person in the 21st century.
Because if you get that right, then the art that you create is an absolute privilege. And whether it does 1 million views or 5 views, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whether it gets a big distribution deal or doesn't, it doesn't matter. Whether it gets awards or not, it doesn't matter. You know, just enjoy the process.
Enjoy the process. I think that's exactly right. I think that's a wonderful place to end the conversation.
Well, good luck with the edit on that.
Marcus, where can people find out more about you if they want to?
I'm on Twitter.
Oh, God, really?
Follow me there. I'm on Facebook as well. I'm on Instagram somewhere as a street photographer.
And we didn't even get a chance to talk about your street photography.
No.
Marcus, all I can say is thank you. That was every bit as exciting as I thought it would be, and mad and amazing. So thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig.
A massive thank you to Marcus for being a guest on the show. You can find out more about his films at www.mfilms.co.uk. That's www.doublemfilms.co.uk. This has been a Workshop Presents production. Music by Christopher Nelson. If you like this episode, feel free to come back and listen to more when they're available. Thanks for listening. See you next time.